Ali, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. It's great being here.
Let's start with Rick Perry, his comments on Turkey, that its leaders were terrorists, that it could be ejected from NATO. What do you think he was trying to achieve?
I'm not sure that it's much more than sort of Rick Perry pandering to a Republican base that's become more and more hostile to Muslim countries around the world, and generally U.S. international allies that don't fit exactly with the image that they have for the U.S. around the globe. Rick Perry actually had a reputation of, when he was in Texas, of being very friendly to conservative Muslims in Texas itself, and was close to the leader of the Ismaili sect in Texas. And so this is a real shift for him to be so hostile to a Muslim country. And then, you know, after he made his statement during the debate, initially his spokesman walked it back and said that he was only referring to some of Turkey's behavior and not necessarily that its leaders were Islamic terrorists, and that his spokesman person said that Perry would be willing to work with Turkey. And then Perry did an interview with CNN where once again he said the same thing, that these guys are the leaders of Turkey are Islamic terrorists. So I think it's really just it's him playing to a base that gets excited about speaking badly about Muslim countries, even if they're important allies.
Most people are, of course, aware that this was a politician that was jockeying for votes. The Turkish Foreign Ministry said as much. But can this sort of provocative language have an impact on foreign relations nonetheless?
Well, unfortunately, I think it's really terrible to see this kind of language, which is really, this is the language of a rather small group of right-wing bloggers who are really anti-Muslim bigots, and this is their language, and now it's being used by presidential candidates, and so that is troubling. That not only is this becoming so mainstreamed in the U.S. that it's being picked up on by presidential candidates, but also, you know, if Rick Perry has since dropped out of the race, of course, but bringing up this kind of rhetoric in campaigns forces his opponents, the other candidates, to confront it. And Newt Gingrich has had a little bit of a history with kind of Islamophobic comments as well. And should any of those Republicans win in November's presidential election, then they're going to have to deal with the very real consequences of dealing with our NATO ally Turkey and the rhetoric that they espoused on the trail, and that could very well chill relations and be bad for our geostrategic alliance with Turkey.
You mentioned Newt Gingrich calling the Palestinians an invented people. Herman Cain, before he dropped out, made fun of Uzbekistan. It seems a lot of the discourse here is shifting to the right. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly a nationalist element to it, and it's not only in those ways about Muslim countries, but it's also, you know, the way that the Republican candidates talk about European socialism and that sort of thing, as if France and the United Kingdom and Germany are not among our closest allies in the world. And I think that this really is a kind of stoking of nationalist sentiment to rally the Republican base, the kind of, you know, the flag waving and loving America, which is all great, but that shouldn't come at the expense of our relationship with the rest of the world, which in this era where the world is becoming connected by air flight and the internet and commerce and manufacturing abroad and so on, it's all the more important to keep our relationships with other countries in mind.
How does the front-runner, former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney fall into the fold?
Mitt Romney is certainly more cautious on a lot of foreign policy issues. On the Palestinian, when Rick Perry brought up the Palestinians, when Newt Gingrich brought up the Palestinians and said they were an invented people, he doubled down on that during another televised debate a few weeks ago, and the moderator then turned to Mitt Romney and asked him if he thought the Palestinians were invented. And this was, you know, Newt Gingrich had also said that the Palestinians, these people are terrorists, and then repeated some false claims about their society. And when Mitt Romney was asked if he agreed, he said he agreed with everything except for the fact that the Palestinians were an invented people, meaning that he agreed with the statement that the Palestinian people are all terrorists. And so he's been more careful, but still has the occasional slip up, and also kind of pumps up this nationalist Republican rhetoric.
The candidates on the Republican side here were largely more vociferous, perhaps bellicose on Iran in particular in their statements. Can you elaborate about Iran and the Republican field?
Yeah, many of the Republicans have made incredibly hawkish statements on Iran, with the exception, of course, of Ron Paul, who comes from a non-interventionist, libertarian sort of perspective, which of course troubles, you know, his successes in the primary election so far has troubled, I think, a lot of establishment Republicans who prefer the more hawkish rhetoric. And yeah, there's no doubt that they've been increasingly belligerent with Iran, and this is also another thing that, should a Republican be elected in November, they will have to come back and they will be given all the classified intelligence briefings, and they will hear from the military commanders. And as president, they will have to come back to the American people and be accountable to this hysteria they've whipped up and all the hype they've whipped up about how they would, you know, have been laying down red lines about attacking Iran and what they would do.
You mentioned Ron Paul as someone who stands out in the field. Can you elaborate a little bit on his foreign policy, how it's different from the other Republican candidates?
Well, Ron Paul, he oftentimes gets called an isolationist, and I'm not sure that's completely right, but he definitely is close. He's a guy who believes in basically a tiny, tiny modicum of federal government. And since foreign policy and things like military budgets and foreign aid budgets are carried out by a federal government, he thinks that all these programs, along with just about every other government program, should be significantly scaled back. And so, to that extent, he doesn't want the U.S. to get into and finance more wars that cost billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars. And he doesn't want to see massive amounts of U.S. troops or resources deployed abroad. His own foreign policy is sort of, he kind of wants to take all the U.S. embassies around the world and turn them into little mini chambers of commerce to encourage business ties with other businesses around the world and the global free market, which is very much in line with his libertarian ideology of that the unfettered free market is the right path for America and the world, and that business should not be hindered and should be helped along in every instance by government.
One point that I did want to make, you know, internationally, Rick Perry's comments in Turkey anyways drew a lot of criticism. However, the point should be made that this election is not about foreign policy issues, isn't it?
Right. I mean, you know, it's funny that with the exception of Ron Paul, the Republicans have really been united in a lot of their foreign policy talk. The kind of opposition to Turkey, the hostility to Iran, a very much right-wing pro-Israel perspective. But these are generally a few debate questions here and there, and there's been a few national security debates that have focused more on these issues. But for the most part, the debate, the public discourse about the campaign has been on the economy, which is still sort of very slowly recovering, and I think that the Republicans probably see an opening that when they do finally pick their nominee this summer, that's going to be the tack they take against President Obama.
Final question, Ali Gharib. Is it your assessment, too, that Mitt Romney is the likely nominee, likely candidate here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the case. He's probably the likely candidate. Some South Carolina polls, which is the primary that's coming up here on Saturday, show that Newt Gingrich is getting a lot of support there as well. He's recently had millions of dollars poured into a group that's affiliated with his campaign that's supporting him, that's been running ads and films and stuff in North Carolina. So he's sort of making yet another resurgence. You know, I'm not inclined to make too many predictions, but I do think that it's hard to not say that Mitt Romney is the likely candidate still.
Ali Gharib from Think Progress, we do appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me on, Baris.